Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome if it is your first time here. My name is Natalie Beisner. I am a former Democrat turned Christian conservative. Didn't happen overnight. I've shared that story lots of times before, and you can find me on Fox News at Night every single week for the most part, and let's dive into it. So, today, I want to talk about this idea of banning trans people from owning firearms. I made a short video about it last week and some posts, and apparently it's a very unpopular opinion in MAGA, which was a bit surprising to me. So, all of this started because there are reports that the Trump administration is possibly looking into ways to ban trans people from owning firearms. Now, I don't believe that that will ever actually happen. First of all, Trump says a lot of stuff, and we have no reports to be clear that he himself actually said this or wants to do it. But he says a lot of stuff. And then the liberals freak out, and then it never actually happens. His executive order criminalizing burning the flag is kind of another case of this, where Trump, when he was signing the executive order, he made it sound like the executive order said or did something that it actually didn't. He made it sound like it was criminalizing burning the flag just privately in your own home, a flag that belongs to you, you could get in trouble. That's not what the executive order actually said or did, and I don't know if Trump made it seem like something more than it was intentionally or not, but people love to freak out about anything he says, whether he's completely clear or not completely clear. It doesn't matter. People just freak out. So I don't actually think that this is something that they're seriously going to try to do. If they did seriously try to do it, it would be blocked, and rightfully so. It would make its way to the Supreme Court, I'm sure, and they would rule in the correct way, which is that we can't ban a group of people from owning firearms just because they're a member of a certain group, obviously. But because this has been in like the cultural discussion, the news cycle, it prompted a discussion. And I realized that my opinion, I guess, is relatively unpopular among MAGA, which is fine, which is great. This is actually what I love to do. I love to talk about ideas and try to persuade you to think like I do. Now, I may be unsuccessful, and that's fine. You don't have to think like me, but I like to tell you why I think the way that I do. And honestly, when I posted that short last week, I got a lot of comments that were like, no, you know what? Trans people are mentally ill. Mentally ill people can't own firearms, and that's fine. But that doesn't address my points because, unfortunately, a lot of people are mentally ill. Like I have anxiety and depression, which is classified as a mental illness. I'm willing to bet that at least half the people watching this video right now have suffered with either anxiety and or depression. So you really tread into murky waters when you start saying anyone who is mentally ill cannot own a gun, because who is mentally ill? Who gets to decide who's mentally ill? Is it our medical industrial complex right now, which is all too keen on giving you a diagnosis and then pumping you full of a bunch of prescription drugs? Because they're happy to do that. They're happy to have you come in to a psych or whoever and explain your problems and then say, you know what? Yeah, you have anxiety, you have depression, you have this, you have that. Here's a pill. Now, I do suffer from anxiety and depression. I don't label myself mentally ill for a few reasons. Number one, I manage my life. You know, I have really struggled with anxiety and depression from my earliest memories, actually, from when I was a child. But I manage my life, and in many ways, I'm quite successful. Not as successful as I would like to be, but you wouldn't look at me and think, "Oh gosh, she's mentally ill." On top of that, I'm not a danger to myself or to anyone else. On top of that, I just think, is identifying as mentally ill, is that kind of identifying as a victim? You know, is that the best thing to identify as? No. uh, Now, obviously, if you're someone who's severely mentally ill, you know, who's maybe hearing voices or seeing hallucinations, you should go get that checked out and get help and, you know, reconcile with reality that actually you are mentally ill. But I'm in touch with reality. I struggle with anxiety and depression, but I'm in touch with reality. So I'm not going to sit here and give myself a label of I'm mentally ill. And yet, according to like the DSM, I'm mentally ill. I suffer from anxiety and depression. So again, who gets to say who's mentally ill? Do we trust our current medical industrial complex to do that? Obviously, the answer is no. We don't even label actual mental illness as mental illness, one of those things being gender identity disorder, which, make no mistake, is actually a mental illness. It is a mental illness. And gender identity disorder is what we used to call people who are trans. Even before we called it gender dysphoria, we called it gender identity disorder. And it is 100% a mental illness. But we don't ban people based off of having a mental illness. According to federal law right now, having a mental illness is not enough to get you barred from exercising your Second Amendment rights. You have to be either involuntarily confined at some point recently, or you have to be individually adjudicated by a court or some other governing body that you are mentally unstable and unfit to manage your own affairs. So just being anxious, just having anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder or even gender identity disorder, that is not currently enough. Just that diagnosis is not enough to get you banned from owning a firearm. Now, certain states have red flag laws, which I largely disagree with. I think that they inhibit people from seeking mental health treatment. And on top of that, I think, again, they're a slippery slope, because you and I both know that the left has taken over almost every single cultural institution, including the medical industrial complex. So there are people who would be all too happy to identify you or me as mentally unwell and not able to manage our own affairs. And, oh, they need to go into a padded room, and, oh, you can't give them any guns. So you know that. So it is a slippery slope. But for better or worse, certain states have red flag laws, which allows a court to temporarily remove your access and right to own firearms if it has been deemed that, again, you are a threat to yourself or to others. So just all that to say that just saying, hey, they're mentally ill and mentally ill people should not own firearms, that is not enough. This issue is not as black and white as all that, because, again, millions of adults in the US struggle with a mental illness. And are you trying to take away their guns too? Or are you just trying to take away the right of someone who identifies as trans? On top of that, there are people who struggle with gender identity disorder who actually, want help. I know that we live in a society where the medical industrial complex, again, will just affirm you and tell you that, sure, you were born in the wrong body and you can become a woman, or you actually are a woman, or vice versa. But there are people who are struggling with it and don't actually want to go down that path of affirmation. And so are we trying to discourage those people from getting treatment, or, going and filling out a form and saying, yeah, I'm struggling with these thoughts, because, oh my gosh, then we're going to ban them from owning firearms? I do really think that when we go into this, it starts to discourage people from actually getting the help that they need. On top of that, there are trans people who are sane and who are in touch with reality. Yes, they suffer from gender identity disorder, but they're still in touch with reality. Just like I suffer from anxiety and depression, but I'm still in touch with reality. So two that come to mind off the bat are Blair White and Buck Angel. Both of those people, Blair White would tell you that he is a male and he'll always be a male, but he prefers to present as a woman. Buck Angel would tell you that she's a female and she prefers to present as a male, but she's always going to be a female. That's in touch with reality. That's like the old school transsexuals saying, hey, we like to present as the opposite sex, but we know we're not actually the opposite sex. And that was way back when, before it became a social contagion and like a valid identity and part of the, pride thing. And I think that's weird. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it should be encouraged, but it's also not illegal. And it's still in touch with reality. You are in touch with the reality that you are always going to be the sex that you were born as, and you just like to look a certain way. It's weird, but it's not illegal. And we wouldn't want to ban those people from owning firearms just because they identify as trans. In fact, I know that Blair White in particular is a very big firearm advocate. And I would much rather that he own those firearms, know how to use them properly and safely, and maybe encourage other people who watch him to do the same. Like, to me as a patriot, that's a bigger asset than saying, hey, I know that you're a patriot. I know you're a Trump supporter. I know you're in touch with reality. I know that you're always going to be a man, but we're going to take away your firearms because you identify as trans and you got all those surgeries to look like a woman. That's not a net positive for me as a patriot. Again, if we were to go down this road of trying to see if we could ban trans people from owning firearms, you would have to have individual assessment and individual adjudication. And that's not a perfect solution because you're counting on the government to do its job competently and to do it with care and with individual concern, and it's just like not going to happen. On top of that, we live in a society right now where, again, the medical industrial complex has been captured, and for the most part, medical professionals will affirm feelings of transgenderism as opposed to try to help you combat them and get back in touch with reality. So, I hesitate to say that we want individual assessments because we're going to individually assess them in the wrong direction. But and on top of that, it's also infringing. It's infringing on the Second Amendment right, as we already do every single day. So it is not a perfect solution. But again, if you even want to talk about banning certain groups from owning firearms, which is not constitutional, is not American, it can't just be a blanket across the board ban. It needs to be, we're going to individually assess you because you are in this group that has a higher likelihood of mental illness or whatever. So we have to individually assess you. Again, slippery slope, not a perfect solution, but 100 times better than saying any member of this group is banned from owning a firearm. That makes no sense whatsoever. And we know it makes no sense because we know, guns rights advocates know, that gun control does not work. More laws restricting gun ownership for American citizens is not what we need. It's not going to solve the problem because the only people who listen to gun laws are law-abiding people. Criminals don't listen to gun laws. As I went over in a previous videos, if someone is intent on violence, they're going to find a way to commit the violence. Whether if it's not guns, it's going to be knives. If it's not knives, it's going to be driving a vehicle into a crowd. It will be something. And I understand. I want to inhibit these mass shootings and the devastation that they wreak as much as the next person. But we have to look at what is actually feasible and what is actually constitutional and what actually makes sense. We have 400 million guns in the US. The ability to print your own gun, to make your own gun, is only getting more technologically advanced and easier and cheaper. That's not me encouraging anyone to do anything illegal. I'm just pointing out the reality. So the idea of inhibiting violent criminals from owning guns, that we need more laws to do that, like it does not make sense at all. It's not feasible. If we're gonna, sorry about the fly, I tell you guys I have a fly problem in the summer. If we're gonna make any legislation regarding guns, what we need to do is make legislation that every single school in the US needs to have armed security. They need to have cops or they need to have armed security all the time because we should be protecting our most precious resource, which is children, with guns with the same security that we protect jewelry and money and anything else. Children should be protected that way. Putting up a sign, hey, this is a gun-free zone, does not help. We know it doesn't help. Just like saying, hey, we're going to ban all trans people from owning firearms does not help. It doesn't help because they're going to get the firearms. And it's also, on top of being immoral and unconstitutional and un-American, it's not feasible. It's not solving the problem. It's like putting a Band-Aid on the problem and then patting yourself on the back. It's not going to solve the problem. We need legislation that every school in America needs to have armed security. Absolutely. We need good guys with guns to combat the bad guys. And culturally, we need to work on this problem because it's not just a legislative issue, it's a cultural issue. It's a godlessness issue. We encourage mental illness in this country. We have to stop that. Again, putting the little Band-Aid of, oh, trans people can't own guns, that doesn't help. That doesn't help. We're actively encouraging our children to be trans. We're saying that you were born in the wrong body and we can help you get the right body. We need to stop doing that. It has to stop. And if we want to go down the road of maybe individual assessment for people who identify as trans before they own guns, I worry about that. But I can get more on board with that than a blanket ban. blanket ban is insane. And by the way, if we were going to start blanketly banning people based off of their membership in a group, we would start with black men in cities. And I know that's not like cool to say and it's not PC, but it's the truth. If we're saying, hey, you're in a group that has a high propensity for violence, we would start banning black men in cities. Because as far as damage with guns, shootings, homicides, that would be black men in cities, like every other weekend in Chicago. But of course, no one wants to do that. And no one should want to do that. We wouldn't do that because it's not going to solve the problem. These guys are still going to get the gun, number one, and it's also unconstitutional. It's un-American. It's not going to solve the problem. So how do we actually work to solve the problem? A blanket ban for trans people is not solving the problem. And by the way, I said this in the short video as well. 1 in 3 combat veterans seeks treatment for a mental health disorder. And you got to figure that if 1 in 3 are seeking treatment, then a whole hell of a lot more silently suffer and don't seek treatment. And yet we would never say, look at this group. They have a high propensity for mental illness because of what they have seen and what they have done and what they have done on behalf of their country. So we need to ban them from owning firearms. We would never do that, right? But it's the same logic because you're trying to just do a one-size-fits-all approach based off of propensity for violence or propensity for mental illness. And unfortunately, a one-size-fits-all approach rarely works. We saw that during COVID. We tried to enact a one-size-fits-all approach to the entirety of society instead of triaging and, trying to actually protect the most vulnerable, which were elderly, sick people, people who are overweight and obese. And so people like me, which is the majority of people who were going to survive COVID and were always going to survive COVID, we were forced to, in LA, undergo 2 years of a pandemic, 2 years of forced masking, 6 months of vaccine passports, an entire propaganda campaign to try to force us to take in an experimental injection into our bodies because we tried to do this one-size-fits-all approach and we never course corrected. It just doesn't work. And unfortunately, that's the problem with getting government involved in these things, the federal government, because the best they can do is a one-size-fits-all approach. They can't give you individual assessment and give you what you need. The government doesn't know what you need. You know what you need. You know what your family needs. So a one-size-fits-all approach to, hey, a trans person can't own a gun, a black man can't own a gun, combat veterans can't own a gun, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's not feasible. It's not going to happen. So you guys tell me what you think in the comments below. I want to hear your opinion. It's fine if you don't agree with me, but please leave a comment other than some variation of trans people are mentally ill and mentally ill people can't own firearms or shouldn't be able to own firearms. Because like I already said, it's just not as black and white as all that. Because if you're not mentally ill yourself, you probably know a ton of adults who would be classified as mentally ill. It's not a solution. So do you want to tell me that anyone who has gender identity disorder should be banned from owning a firearm, including people like Blair White, Buck Angel, because they're the minority and most trans people seem to be completely crazy? Is that what you want to tell me? Because then you're going to, and tell me that if that's what you want to tell me. But like I said, you're going down a road where we're infringing on individuals' rights and saying, oh, if it saves one life. And that's not American. That's what was done to us, that was done to me, that was done to you during COVID. My rights were infringed upon, and I was told, oh, if it saves one life. That's not how it should work. My rights can't be infringed upon to save one life. You would need to have individual assessment, individual adjudication before any kind of rights are revoked. That's the way that it works here in America. So I just wanted to share with you my thoughts a little bit more in depth because, like I said, I understand this is an unpopular opinion. It does surprise me that it's unpopular. It surprises me, frankly, that the side that typically will tell you that gun laws don't work, gun control does not work, because only law-abiding people listen to the laws. Now we're suddenly on board with more gun laws to ban trans people from owning like that doesn't really track for me. So maybe explain it to me in the comments. I think From where I'm sitting, that seems very unprincipled and it doesn't really make sense. I know that emotions are high. I know this horrific mass shooting just happened. I know that we're all frustrated with this transgender thing being thrust upon us and, badgering us into speaking falsehoods. All of that, I get it. And I do want to culturally stop encouraging that. And I want to enact legislation where medical practitioners can no longer affirm or encourage that. But from where I'm sitting, enacting legislation that these people who maybe are struggling with feelings of gender identity disorder, that they should be banned from owning firearms, not only is it unconstitutional and un-American, it also, like I said, just does not seem feasible. It seems like a virtue signal at best. So tell me what you guys think in the comments below. I really want to hear from you on this one. Please be respectful. And like I said, just please say something besides mentally ill people shouldn't own firearms, unless you really want to take them away from people who have anxiety, people who have depression, combat vets who suffer from mental health disorders, which again is at least 1 in 3. Like, if that's your point of view, great, explain it to me. But don't just say mentally ill people shouldn't own firearms, because unfortunately we have a lot of people who on the books are classified as mentally ill. And on top of that, we have, a medical industrial complex that is incentivized by classifying you as mentally ill. So again, I just don't think this issue is so black and white. So let's have a conversation in the comments, okay? And I will talk to you guys again very soon.